You are listening to an American Free Press podcast. Joining me on the line is Russ Caswell, who runs a motel up in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. Russ, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Russ, I read an article online on the AmericanFreePress.net website, the headline being Fighting Back Against Civil Forfeiture Laws, and I just want to read a little bit from this article to get the audience up to date. The writer was Keith Johnson, and it begins like this. Up until recently, Russ Caswell has been living the American dream. For more than a half-century, he and his family have operated a modest motel his father built in 1955. He owns a property free and clear and was expecting to retire in the near future. But thanks to unconstitutional civil forfeiture laws being enforced by the federal government, Caswell's plans have been cut short and his dream has been turned into a nightmare. The ordeal began 2 years ago when Caswell and his wife each received letters from the feds notifying them that their $1 million property was being seized. Now, Russ, everything I read, was that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. 2 years ago, out of the blue, you got these letters from the federal government.
Yes.
In the letters themselves, were they actually saying that they're going to seize your property?
Yes. That's the first notice I had of anybody having any problem with the motel. We've always cooperated completely with the police, and they even say we do. In that we deposed like 5 or 6 of the police, and I'll read some of them. Mm-hmm. They all agree that we totally cooperate with them and that we could do no more. The town issues us a permit to operate every year. We get inspected maybe a dozen times a year by different boards in town, the building department, the health department, the water department. Like I say, they give us a permit to operate. None of them have any concerns about anything here. They now and then have small things they want me to fix, which I do. I've never been questioned or approached about any problems with the motel. We cooperate with the police. The police won't cooperate with us. They won't tell us anything. Even if we call them for some sort of a problem or whatever, they'll come down and take care of the problem. But when we try to find out what went on or if we should be putting somebody out or anything along them lines, they won't tell us anything. I go to the police station now and then to try to find things out. They won't tell us anything at all. And then all of a sudden, right out of the blue, with no warning, no nothing, I get these 2 forfeiture notices in the mail. We're taking your property. And they list in there, I think it was like 5 or 6, maybe more than, maybe 7 cases of people that they've arrested here. Most of them, other than 2 of them, I never even heard of before. I never even knew these cases even existed. And they took these people to court, as near as I can figure, for kind of minor drug offenses. And they convicted them. And now they're saying that I should have known all about this stuff. And even though they won't tell me anything, they're saying, well, if I read newspaper articles, this is after the fact stuff, I'm supposed to take that information, which some reporter has already put his twist on if he wanted to, which they do a lot of that.
Right.
And I'm supposed to take that information as being the word of God or whatever you want to say, and make my business decisions on this as to doing more to stop this kind of thing going on. We already do everything we can to stop it. Like I say, we totally cooperate with the police. We have pretty much no tools to deal with anything like this. I mean, that to me is the police department's job. As near as I can figure, we keep a do not rent list of anybody that we have had trouble with. And I would say almost all of the trouble we have is like any motel, domestic kind of things, boyfriend, girlfriend, or at least between people that know one another. There has never been, that I know of, any stranger on stranger problems. It's just domestic stuff. Mm-hmm. And they're using this type of stuff to steal my property. Now, let me read something to you. This is from the deposition of Vincent Kelly. He's the DEA agent that signed the complaint against us. Okay. Now, my lawyer asked him, this whole thing is very puzzling, and it gets more puzzling the more I get into it. It's all about money as far as I can see. It has nothing to do with any sort of drug problems. Now, my lawyer asked him this question. Now, what I'm asking is, as you've been involved in this case for nearly 2 years, whatever you've read, whatever you've seen, whoever you've spoken to, the question is whether you have any knowledge or information that the Caswells knew about any of these incidents in the complaint before the incident arose. And his answer is no. He's the one that signed the complaint against us. And then here it says, now again, I'll ask it because the Assistant U.S. Attorney pointed it out. Beyond your own personal knowledge, are you aware that the DEA has any knowledge that the Caswells knew about any of these incidents before they occurred? And his answer is no. And this is right from his deposition.
I don't get that.
I don't either. This whole thing is puzzling. That's why I say it's about money is all I can figure. And this other fella, Tom Casey, he's a police officer in Tewksbury. He's the other one that signed it against us.
You know him?
I do, yeah. And I'm friendly with him. That's part of what I don't get about this whole thing. And I get along fine with all the police, the ones I know. I don't know a lot of them anymore. Most of the ones at my age are retired. We've never had any problem with any of them as far as just getting along with them. And then I get clobbered with this thing all of a sudden, right out of nowhere. Tom Casey, who was one that signed the complaint against us originally, something that keeps coming up all the time is he says that he has had 100 drug investigations at the motel. I had never heard of any of this. So I asked my lawyer to question him about it in his deposition. So my lawyer asked him, let me ask you, how did you arrive at this number of over 100? Do you have a list? And his answer, I don't have a list. Did you make a count? I didn't make a count. Did you make a good faith estimate? Good faith estimate referring and consulting with past detectives, retired and still on the job. And you spoke to officers. I'm sorry, did you say both retired and on the job? Yes. So you spoke to your fellow officers and asked them how often they had been to that location? Yes. Did you take into account that many of these incidents reports have 6 or 7 responding officers? His answer, to one incident? Yes. Answer, yes. Did you take that into account when you made your estimation? No. Do you think that would change your estimation? You mean like 6 arrests in one incident? And he kind of stutters a little bit here. No, I'm sorry to interrupt. What I mean by that is for one arrest, you might have 6 responding officers, right? So if an officer says to you, I have been there 20 times, and you ask 6 officers in the cases, I see what you're saying. Did you take that into account when you made your estimate? No. I based that more on consulting with Lieutenant Peterson. I asked him in my own experience, do you know if Lieutenant Peterson has a list? No, I don't know if he has a list. Did Lieutenant Peterson tell you what to write? No, and then it kind of goes off of the subject there.
Right.
But basically, they have 5 or 6 people come to the motel for one incident, and that can be considered 5 or 6 investigations. But I picture an investigation as being kind of a big deal, you know, a bunch of stuff going on. All they have to do is ask somebody a question. That's an investigation. In reviewing the cards, the guest cards, I guess we'll call them, yes. Have you ever told the motel that they shouldn't rent to a particular individual whose name you recognize? No, not that I'm aware of. Did you recognize names occasionally? Yes. And you have information or access to information concerning people's criminal history. Is that right? Yes. And is that the type of information you would disclose to the motel clerk? No. And here's another one from Casey, which again goes to making this thing puzzling. To your knowledge, and I apologize in advance, Lieutenant, I've asked similar questions to 6 or 7 of your fellow officers. So if I am asking it again, I do apologize. But have you ever had any problem with the staff at the motel refusing to cooperate with you? His answer is never.
What was the next thing that happened after that, the next significant event? What did you do?
Like you say, I was shocked. I was just trying to figure it out. I'm thinking there's got to be something that either went on here that I don't know about, or they misinterpreted something that I did or some of my help did or something. And I'm still at that point because they come up with absolutely nothing. They use these vague innuendos like he could have known, he should have known. Why didn't he know? And well, the reason I don't know a lot of this is I can't see through the walls of the motel to see what somebody may be doing inside their locked motel room.
Right.
And, you know, if you think about it a little bit, anybody going to a motel, hotel, or whatever, once you're in your room, the owner of the place or the front desk, they don't know what you're doing as long as you're quiet, not bothering anybody, and they really have no right to know what you're doing.
Right.
But yet they're saying, somehow I should have known this. And they say, I live right next door to the motel. They're using that, saying, well, he lives next door, so he should know what goes on. Now, what I would answer to that, which makes no sense either, is that would give me, and it does give me, all the more reason to not want any trouble at the motel. I live next door. My mother-in-law lives with us, and my son, his wife, and my granddaughter live with us. Now, that alone would tell you I would want to do everything I can to keep any troubled people out of there. I have a shop in the backyard which has equipment stuff in it, so obviously I don't want any criminals wandering around the place. So I do everything I can, but yet they treat me like some kind of horrible criminal or something. I have no record whatsoever. Nobody in my family has any record. I've never been questioned about any of this stuff. It's just a huge puzzle to me, what's going on, other than it's about money. There's one other thing this DEA agent said. My lawyer asked him this question. You mentioned earlier when you were testifying how you identify, and part of your job is to identify, implement, and follow up on cases that you did some research at the Registry of Deeds. What was the purpose of that research? His answer was to find out who owns the property. If it's in a trust corporation, try to establish how much equity, listen to this, try to establish how much equity is on the property. And my lawyer asked, what's the relevance to the equity position? And this is his answer, if you can believe it or not. DOJ policy is there must be $50,000 worth of equity. So they're looking for places that they can seize or threaten to seize and get money out of it.
Okay, this is kind of a little strange. You have no...
It is, very.
You have no record. You've never been arrested for anything?
Nothing. Absolutely. I don't even think I've had a parking ticket all my life.
All right.
So it's not like they're trying to get me with this for something else I did, because there is nothing.
Huh.
One other thing I want to mention, these 8 cases they've had, we have, it's hard to say exactly, but I'm saying somewhere between 10 and 12,000 people a year stay at the motel.
Wow.
And they've got roughly 1 case a year. Now, to me, that is a pretty good record.
Yeah.
The reasoning they use, I don't know if I said this before, that I'm not doing enough. They don't say what that is. They just put these vague innuendos out there, and you're supposed to figure it out from there.
Okay, let's get to the nitty-gritty of this stuff, because this is becoming a little surreal.
It is.
2 years ago, you get these notices. You're obviously shocked by them, and anybody listening to this would be shocked by it too. Trying to figure it out, it's a little mind-numbing. But what did you do right after that, after you kind of woke up from your shock? Did you contact somebody about this?
The first person I called was my bookkeeper. He says, you got any idea what this is for? And so I sent them up to him, and he looked at them. He says, they must have sent these to the wrong address or something. That was his thing. He says, you better talk to your lawyer about this. So I talked to the lawyer, and even when I was first telling the lawyer this story, my own lawyer, he's kind of looking at me like, what aren't you telling me? There's got to be more to this. Like he was suspicious of me or something, you know. And he even says now that until I got into this thing and saw what this was all about, especially when we deposed 6 or 7 of the police, and all through, I bet you 100 times my lawyer asked the different ones, did you notify the Caswells? Do you think they knew about any of this? And all their answers were no, the whole thing. And so it took a while for my lawyer to wrap his head around it because it was just so bizarre. That's, you know, where we went from there, and I've been spending a fortune on this thing, defending it, and now the Institute for Justice has volunteered to help because they looked into this and saw how ridiculous it was, and so they're helping me out pro bono on it. I think what they try to do is break people, sort of like a frivolous lawsuit, so you'll pay them something to go away. Right. I mean, that's all I can figure, because how many businesses, I mean, you have a hard enough time in business getting by without getting clobbered with this kind of expense. That's all I can figure out they're trying to do.
It's about money.
That's all it's about. People don't realize how dangerous these laws are to personal property. If you own anything, say you own an apartment house or garage, whatever, and you're renting it to somebody, and they have a friend over or something that does some kind of drug thing, and the police catch them, they can seize that apartment house, whatever it is you own. Say maybe you had a camp up north somewhere out in the woods, and just, for instance, say some snowmobilers stopped in the yard and started smoking pot or something, and the police caught them. They can seize that camp. Now, you have to prove you didn't know anything about it by hiring lawyers, the whole deal. And I think what happens then is they say, well, we'll settle for so-and-so. Well, to me, it's not settling. It's more like extortion.
Right.
So I just think people have no idea about these laws. I know I never did. I never heard of such a thing where they can take property from people who have done absolutely nothing because of the conduct of maybe a handful of people that you don't even know, have basically no control over, know nothing about, and the police never even tell you this stuff is even going on until you get a notice that they're taking your property.
Is this America, Russ?
Yeah, I know. I have to take a double look here if I'm in Russia or Cuba or Venezuela or something. That's why I say people don't understand what these laws are. They're just absolutely ridiculous. I'm looking at this as the police and the federal government actually have a financial interest in letting drugs get in the country, into the state, and into the town. This stuff comes, I'm guessing, a lot of it from Mexico. Comes all the way across the country. With all the millions they have to enforce these laws, they don't enforce them or can't enforce them, whatever the reason is. But yet when a minuscule amount of it gets to my property, all of a sudden it's my fault, and they want to reward themselves for their own failures by taking my property.
Right.
Now, if they were doing their job, keeping the stuff totally out of the country, the state, and therefore the town, people like me shouldn't even have to be dealing with this, because the average guy like me has really no tools to deal with this stuff. People have privacy rights and all of that kind of thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at it as they have a huge financial success to allow this stuff to get to my property or anybody's property, because then they can steal your property.
As we all know, the federal government is not interested in policing the borders of this country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now I'm almost understanding why.
Right, because there's too much money at stake, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They let it get to people like me and then seize your property.
How much have you spent so far on this?
Roughly $100,000. I had to take a loan out to pay some of it, a lot of it.
I'm sorry, you said $100,000?
Yeah, probably close to that, yes. Because this has just been going on and on and on. And like I say, they, I think, try to break you and get you to settle and pay them something to go away. But I'm not about to do that. This is completely wrong and un-American, and I'm going to fight it till my last penny.
Who do you think is orchestrating this? I know we can say the Department of Justice or the Tewksbury, but do you think there is one individual or a few individuals who are actually the puppet masters who are saying, let's destroy Russ Caswell's life?
I couldn't imagine who it is. I mean, I have really no trouble with anybody in town. The people I talk to in town are just as outraged about it as I am. And if there is somebody that's thinking that way, I don't have a clue who it is. I get along fine with everybody. I'm just puzzled as much by that. The other thing is this Vincent Cecil, the DEA agent, like I read out of his deposition, part of his job is to find places where people have equity in them and then try to link it somehow to some far-fetched drug thing and take the property. So, again, it's about money, is all I can figure.
This matter has had, besides financial repercussions, it also has had other repercussions. How's your wife doing, Russ?
She's doing well, but she's had an awful time. Well, it's kind of a long story, but she's home now, but she's bedridden, and she had heart trouble, and she went in for a heart operation, turned into a complete disaster. I obviously can't prove anything, but I'm sure the stress of this ridiculous crap had a lot to do with it. She did have heart problems, but the doctor said try to keep her stress-free as much as you can and stuff, and which I did. She didn't have anything to do with the motel. She stayed at home. We had an office at home for about the last 15 years or so, just dealing with the public, just the stress of running business and all of that. And that was all going good. I kept it away from her, and then this thing came along, and I remember when I had to show her the thing there, and she was just dumbfounded as I was. And I just remember her reaction. She says, they're trying to take the motel? So you can't tell me that the stress of all that didn't at least help this.
What is IJ saying? What's their prognosis for this?
Well, they're trying to get it thrown out of court, actually, by the middle of February. But if it goes to a trial, then it'll be sometime next summer, they said. But I'm still trying to figure out what their case is. As far as I can see, they don't have any case. It's just all these vague innuendos and could have known, should have known, and all that kind of thing. They come up with nothing because there's nothing to come up with. It seems to me, if in their mind they're having trouble with me or anybody else or the property you own, it just seems common sense that the first person they would want to talk to would be the property owner, not just keep him in the dark about everything.
Did the Institute for Justice say that there's a possibility that the government might drop this case?
Well, they don't know. That's what they're trying to do, but I don't know all these lawyers in and out things.
Sure.
But they go and do their thing, and the other side, the government, nothing happens to them. They do this crap to people, and they go on their merry way and leave your life in shambles afterwards, and probably go out and try to cause trouble for the next guy.
Right, and they're already doing that. Did Institute for Justice say that you can sue the government to get back the money that you spent on this?
Yeah, we've been talking about that. We haven't really get into that deeply until this thing is over with.
But, I mean, you can, though, right?
As far as I know, yeah.
That's a good thing. I mean, for what they put you through for basically nothing.
Now, I'm not trying to say that we don't get our share of bad people like everybody does, but we do our best to keep them out, which we probably could do a lot better if the police would help us and not keep us in the dark about stuff. Like, for instance, We tell them anything they want to know. We always did, and they say that. They come in and look through our card rack with the cards people sign in on. We put them up on a rack on the wall.
Right.
And they come in and look through that. And my lawyer asked them again, if you see somebody staying at the motel that you know that could be a problem or whatever, do you tell the desk people? And they say no. So if they come in, find somebody that, hey, this guy could be a problem, they don't tell us. And if he should be a problem, it's all like, well, you should have known. Well, I don't know how. But again, they go back to all these vague innuendos about stuff.
Right. And it's been dragging on for over 2 years.
Yeah, September of '09.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that we might have not talked about, or?
Oh, all right. One other thing. A lot of stuff appears in the newspaper, like I think I touched on this, that just simply isn't true. Now, I don't know whether it comes from the police or from the newspaper itself, but I've seen things in there where people will give us as an address, and they just don't stay here. I don't know if it's people that just don't want you to know where they live or what. And then when something has gone on here, like when this first came out in the paper, it was big headline, front page headlines.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a Motel 6 right up the street here, which we get the same people they get.
Right.
They had a drug thing up there, a pretty sizable thing. There was a lot of money involved in drugs and the typical drug type of thing. And it was on page 6. When something happens up there, now there's a Home Depot up there, which they've had trouble with the parking lot. It's right off of the highway.
Right.
They've had trouble in the parking lot with people dealing drugs. And they gave the Home Depot a warning. The DEA agent said that, which they never told me anything. Not all the time, but lots of times when there's something goes on up there, they'll give the street address instead of Motel 6. The Home Depot, they will give that address. But when it's us, it's Motel Caswell. Big deal. Let me read you one other thing out of Kelly's deposition here. Does the DEA have any information as to whether or not the Caswells knew about any of those events? Kind of rambles after that a little bit, pointing to a stack of papers and all that kind of thing. And then he says, you're asking if they knew about them after the fact. Yes, I am. Do I have any proof that evidence, reason to believe, proof? And his answer was newspaper accounts. He says nothing there about anything other than I'm supposed to read the newspaper to find out what's going on with the police department. Yeah, exactly.
If it wasn't so evil and really illegal what they're doing, it would be funny, but it's not funny because they've taken $100,000 from you already. They've taken your time. They've given you and your wife and the rest of your family aggravation. And they've probably had an impact on your business, I would imagine, because people are reading this.
I don't doubt it a bit.
Have you seen business suffer at all because of this?
Yeah, business has gone down. I can't say for sure it's to do with this, but I'm sure some of it is. I mean, the economy being what it is certainly doesn't help either, but I'm sure this hasn't helped business any, no doubt about it. We have a lot of people that stay by the week, retired people, and a couple of families here and there and that kind of thing, and they're all kind of spooked.
Right.
They're going to be taking the place. We got to find another place to live and that kind of thing, and a lot of them actually have moved out.
I could imagine that people are thinking, well, the government wouldn't come after him if he didn't do something wrong. There must be something wrong.
Yeah. The people over there are scratching their head, too. They can't figure it out. In fact, a couple of reporters have talked with customers over there and stuff, and then they say the same thing. They're happy with the place, and everybody gets along fine.
I see that you have a Facebook page, and it's called Friends of Russ Caswell. 0.0005% of all the people who have stayed at your motel in that time. Yeah. Unbelievable.
I bet they wish they had that good a record.
For not having x-ray vision, not being able to tell what people are doing behind their doors. How many rooms are in the motel?
56.
And your dad built it, as I read earlier, in 1955.
Right.
What can people do on the Facebook page?
They, like to put anything on there in support. That's just a huge moral help, I guess you'd say.
Right.
I've been getting calls actually from all over the country from people that are just outraged about this thing. In fact, I got one call from England. Somebody over there was just outraged about it too. Just regular people that just can't believe that the government can do this type of thing to people.
There has to be one person who is directing this.
Well, we've been trying to find out, but nobody seems to want to own up to it. They kind of point the fingers at one another, sort of, that type of thing. We just haven't been able to find out where it actually is coming from.
Right. So what's the next step in this saga?
Hopefully they'll throw it out of court, but that's something a lawyer could tell you better about than myself from the Institute for Justice. It seems like once they get into this and realize, I think themselves, how ridiculous it is. This Vincent Kelly went around to some of my neighbors and other businesses in town, just asking questions like, do you have any criminal crime problems in the area and that type of thing. I'm guessing trying to point us out to be somebody that has all kinds of criminals staying here. And he came up with nothing. The only thing is there's a place right next door to us. This kind of gets back to the newspaper thing a little bit. It's an eye vision place. And he went over there and he asked the girl in there about crime in the area, and she says no. She says, but you might want to check the motel. And he says, why is that? And she says, oh, I read something in the newspaper. And now I'm thinking, she works right next door and has to reference the newspaper for any problems with the motel. So I went over there, and I didn't get to talk with her. I talked with another girl over there. And she says, I've worked here 8.5 years. She says, I've never had any trouble with anybody from the motel. And I've talked with a few of my neighbors around here, which I get along fine with. The ones I know, I don't know a lot of them. And they say the same thing, we've never had any trouble with anybody from there. Like I say, I live right next door, and I've never had any trouble with anybody over there.
The disturbing part of it also is that it's not just that you got these Washington, D.C. bureaucrats who are conducting this operation, but you've also got the local law enforcement authorities cooperating with them.
Well, it's money. They're after money.
Because they're going to get the money, right?
Yeah, they get 80%. So let's say the place is worth over $1 million. They stand to get like $800,000, $900,000 out of this, the local police department. So that's what they're after. If I had a big mortgage on the place, that type of thing, this wouldn't even be happening.
Right.
But you work your butt off all your life to pay something off, and then all of a sudden they think it's theirs.
Worst case scenario, Russ, they're successful, and they take it away from you. What happens to you?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm 68 years old. My wife is 70. And here we are at the time of life where you're thinking of retiring. I mean, maybe we already should have retired, but haven't. And then you get clobbered with this thing. Welcome to America.
Yeah. Russ Caswell from Motel Caswell, I want to thank you so much for the time you spent today explaining all this to the listeners. I wish you the best of luck, and we're going to stay on top of this and pay close attention to it. I really hope it turns out in your favor, Russ. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Joining me on the line is Scott Bullock, a senior attorney for the Institute for Justice. Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be with you.
Scott, before we talk about the case at hand, which is the Russ Caswell case, for the benefit of the listeners, can you explain to them who you are and what is the Institute for Justice?
Sure. The Institute for Justice is a nonprofit public interest law firm located just outside of Washington, D.C., and we do constitutional law in a wide variety of areas. We essentially sue the government when it violates essential constitutional freedoms, and one of the pillars of our litigation is the protection of private property rights. And toward that end, we are one of the nation's leading critics against civil asset forfeiture. We think forfeiture is a horribly abused power of both the federal government and at the state and local level, and we are trying to put a stop to it.
Okay. And these laws, they recently came into effect, I guess, in the mid-'80s. Is that right?
Well, that's right. I mean, the forfeiture power itself has been around for a long time, but it was largely confined for a good share of our nation's history to very specific cases, and largely involving admiralty and maritime law, things that involve actions on the seas. And it only in recent years has been expanded dramatically to include things like the situation with Mr. Caswell, where you can have a person like Russ Caswell who is completely innocent of wrongdoing, and yet they still stand to lose their property, whether it's their home, their cash, or in this case, the motel that he has spent his entire life building and working at.
I went over in depth with Russ about this, and I also took a look at your website, which is ij.org. And I watched a video, and I saw that statistic that out of the 10 years that the government was looking at how many arrests were made versus the number of people who have rented rooms from Motel Caswell, it came out to something like 0.0005%. And I guess really when you look at that, and that's why Russ kept saying over and over again, the only thing he could think of is that it's about money. Could it be reduced down to just that?
It seems to be that could be the only real reason why the government wants to forfeit the Motel Caswell. In any hotel, any motel, whether it's the most luxurious to budget places like the Motel Caswell, crime occasionally occurs there. There's no question about it. It happens at every motel and hotel. But the bottom line with Russ's case is that the government does not even allege, and of course it could not prove, that he himself has done anything wrong. Indeed, Russ has no criminal record whatsoever. There's no allegation that he somehow somehow knew about whatever crimes occurred there and turned a blind eye, or that he was in on it in some way. He is a completely innocent owner. And a comparable level of criminal activity occurs at places like the Motel 6 and the Fairfield Inn that are in the same vicinity. So the question becomes, well, why didn't the government go after one of those other budget motels, or go after one of the big box retail stores where a significant amount of crime occurs in the parking lots of those stores? The only reason that it could really come down to, I think, is the fact that the Motel Caswell is a family-owned business, unlike the other businesses which are franchises, which means the government would in all likelihood face a legal team funded by a large corporation. And most of those other places, like a lot of commercial properties, are heavily mortgaged. They have a security interest out on them, and so any forfeiture action would involve fighting with not just a large corporate chain, but also many other security interests and creditors that might be involved in this. The Motel Caswell is a family-owned business. It is mortgage-free and has been for decades. So if the government forfeits the Motel Caswell, it is pure profit for law enforcement. And that really brings us to one of the fundamental outrages of civil forfeiture at both the federal level and in the law of many states, is that if the government forfeits property, the proceeds from that forfeiture go directly back to the people who are prosecuting the forfeiture action. So law enforcement is entitled to keep whatever they forfeit. They eat what they kill. And this gives them a direct and, I think, perverse financial incentive to go out and take as much property as possible, to be concerned about the pursuit of profit and property as opposed to the fair and impartial administration of justice. And that's what you see with the Motel Caswell case. In the Motel Caswell case, if the government is successful in the forfeiture, it stands to gain over $1 million because of the value of the land that the Motel Caswell sits on. And if they forfeit it, the federal government would receive 20% of the profit. The rest of it would go back to the Tewksbury Police Department, and Russ would be left with absolutely nothing.
This seems like a rather cynical way to operate government. I can't understand that this government is supposed to be for the people, by the people. What they're doing, it's almost evil. Could there be one person that is pulling the strings here, or is it on automatic pilot?
I think it is not any one person or individual, kind of a bad apple. Any economist will tell you that kind of the first rule of economics is that incentives matter. Incentives matter to people. And if you give people the right incentives, they're likely to respond in a favorable direction. If you give people the wrong or perverse incentives, do not be surprised if they start behaving in a wrong or perverse manner. And the point and the problem with civil forfeiture laws at their core is this financial incentive that is given to law enforcement. So it would not be surprising that their judgment is perverted by that, and that they start thinking about, well, is it really just to take away the Motel Caswell? If we see that there's some problems with some of the people that stay there, shouldn't we go to Russ and talk to him about this and work with him and see what can be done to address this? If you tell them, hey, listen, you stand to gain a lot of money for your police department, and they can justify it by saying, if we had this money, we could do a lot better things in our community, and we could improve law enforcement, and it would give us more resources in challenging economic times where a lot of governments and everybody else are facing a lot of cutbacks. So the bottom line is that you have these perverse financial incentives in place, and then you see governments responding to that by filing completely unjust and outrageous actions like you have with the Motel Caswell.
Yeah, we can get a bigger budget, but all we have to do is sacrifice Mr. Caswell.
That's right, and it's completely outrageous that the government would be driven to that. As I'm sure Russ told you, he has always worked with the police anytime they've come to him. He doesn't want crime at his motel. He lives right next door. Right. His son and his family live right next door. They don't want these things to happen there, and they try to address it every time it is brought to their attention. The fact that they would, rather than try to work with him, bypass all of that and immediately go after his property is something that should not really happen in America, a country that is supposed to respect private property rights.
Exactly. I would think that there would be some kind of a mechanism within this department, someone who could go and check these cases and see if they pass some kind of a smell test of logic and common sense.
Yeah, you would think that somewhere along the line they would say, you know what, this is probably not the one that we want to do. But, these cases become easy for governments oftentimes because civil forfeiture is very different than criminal forfeiture. Criminal forfeiture, people understand that you don't want criminals benefiting from their illegal activities. Bernie Madoff should not be able to keep the yacht yacht and the condos and the mansions that he was able to buy because he defrauded investors for so many years. So criminal forfeiture, people, it can be abused, but people get that and that's legitimate. But in civil forfeiture, the government can take property away from people even without a criminal conviction, even without a person even being arrested for a crime. And that is something that sweeps far too broadly and leads to the type of abuses that you see with the motel Caswell.
Right. Russ said that you good folks are representing him pro bono, and he's already spent, I think he said, about $100,000 in legal fees. Does he have a chance of getting that money back?
Well, he might. If we're successful, the government would have to reimburse him for his attorney fees. But another injustice with civil forfeiture law. Unlike criminal cases where folks, if they can't afford an attorney, they have a right to an attorney, as every cop show will spell out for folks. Civil forfeiture is a civil action. So it's not a criminal action, so the criminal standards of proof do not apply. And if you want to engage in litigation with the government in civil forfeiture, you have to go out and hire an attorney. You have to pay that attorney. And that's another thing I think the government could keep in mind as well, is that Russ, when he was fighting this, had to pay an attorney, and the attorney was doing a good job, and he was giving him a discounted rate, but it was still an enormous financial drain. So there's every incentive then for the property owners in those situations to say, you know what, I don't think I've done anything wrong, but this is killing me. This is bleeding me dry financially. So they settle with the government. They cut a deal with the government. Maybe they give the government a certain amount of money, or they agree to a certain type of settlement. Because of this financial drain, thankfully, we're able to take on Russ's case and not charge him, but we're only able to take on a handful of cases that we come in contact with. As I said, it's yet another weapon that the government has against property owners, and it oftentimes leads folks settling with the government or throwing in the towel because they simply cannot afford to keep fighting.
Right, sure. Is this a unique case, or are there more Russ Caswells across the country?
Unfortunately, there are more Russ Caswells. You see, because of the breadth of civil forfeiture laws, innocent property owners being swept up in the government's grasp. And so there are many instances, documented instances, of folks that have not been arrested and certainly not been convicted of any crimes that are facing the loss of their property. I think one of the things that's unique about the Caswell case, though, is the fact that there is absolutely no evidence that Russ was involved in any way in criminal activity, and yet the government is still going after this motel and is prosecuting this forfeiture action. And it's really one of the most aggressive, one of the broadest applications of civil forfeiture laws that I've seen in recent years.
So this happens regularly, and Russ can get his legal fees back if you're successful. Can he get other money back, any punitive damages?
No, he cannot, because the law is what it is. The law does allow the government to pursue these types of actions, and the law needs to change. We are litigating these cases to try to make clear that courts should be very strictly enforcing limits under the Constitution on these forfeitures, and hopefully state legislatures and Congress will start re-examining the forfeiture policies that they pursue. A fundamental reform that has to happen. I think the most fundamental reform is that civil forfeiture law should not exist. Innocent people should not lose their property unless they are convicted of a crime. That should be a fundamental tenet of our understanding of property rights, is that people who are innocent should not lose their property, and civil forfeiture permits them for that situation to happen. Short of that, the most fundamental and the most important reform is to end this financial incentive structure that's in place. If you're going to have civil forfeiture, any money that's generated from civil forfeiture should go back to the general revenue fund of the state, and then elected officials can decide how to best spend that money. And so you don't have the people that are out there enforcing the law directly benefiting from their enforcement decisions. If you give them that scenario, then it should not be surprising that they're going to shift their priorities toward things that will benefit them personally and institutionally.
Right, and not look at the matter as if there's a living, breathing human being on the other end who's suffering.
Law enforcement should be about impartially enforcing the law. It should be about the pursuit of justice, not about how much money are we going to be able to make from this. And civil forfeiture laws allow that to happen. And I think you're right that they lose individual considerations of why are we doing this, Mr. Caswell. And I think a lot of people, when you describe civil forfeiture to them, are shocked when they realize the remedy that is being sought. This isn't a situation like eminent domain, which we've also fought, which can be highly abused. But in eminent domain, people at least get paid for their property. The government might take it from them, but at least they're compensated for it. Here, and I think some people, when they hear about this situation with Motel Caswell, they say, well, aren't they just trying to close down the motel? No. Yeah, they are going to close down the motel, but then they will sell the land and profit from it and leave Russ with nothing. Absolutely nothing. No compensation. His life's work, his retirement is going to be gone. And that's the thing, as I said, should not happen in America.
It's shocking. It really is. What's the prognosis, you think, for Russ's case? How do you think it's going to unfold? And do you think that the law will change? Is something on the horizon?
Well, we're going to give the government the fight of its life. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that Russ wins. We'll adjust every legal avenue available to us to make sure that that happens. And hopefully, when that happens, and we are successful in that effort, legislators and others will look to this and say, you know what, this shouldn't happen again to somebody. Somebody should not have to fight the way Russ has in order to hold on to something when they've done absolutely nothing wrong. We also, through this case, hope to impose some clear limits under the Constitution, under federal law, on what governments can do, again, to ensure that folks like Mr. Caswell are not caught up in these type of forfeiture abuses.
Well, you guys are doing a great thing. How do you folks get funded?
We're a nonprofit group, so we are funded by folks who believe in what we're doing. A whole range of folks, largely individuals, some foundations, no government support, obviously, and not even a whole lot of corporate support. Just folks who believe in what we're doing, and if somebody's motivated to help us out and help us out with Russ and some of our other cases that we do, they can find out information on our website at ij.org.
Okay, and do some folks make like monthly donations? I've heard folks will even give as little as $5 a month, but they give it every month. Is that something that happens?
Absolutely. People can do that. They can sign up for an automatic type of thing through their credit card or their bank, and we have information about that on our website. And every bit helps from folks who are able to, due to their circumstances, give us more significant contributions, and people who believe in what we're doing but are able to support us to the extent that they're able.
You're doing a great thing. I want to thank you personally for what you're doing. Scott Bullock, Senior Attorney at the Institute for Justice, thanks for spending the time explaining all this to the listeners, and looking forward to talking to you in the future to find out how the Caswell case unfolds.
We'll definitely keep you posted.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.